Traders Corner is proudly brought to you by IG, the specialists in CFD trading.
Welcome back. You're watching Traders Corner, and as always with me in studio is Garth McKenzie, founder and editor of Traders Corner. Garth, welcome.
Hi, Julieta.
Garth, I'm not going to give it away what the portfolio is looking like at the moment, but you could almost theoretically just close up shop now and take the rest of the year off because it's been going rather well.
It has been going very well, considering we sort of, a third of the way through the year now, and we up. Well, I'll give it away. We're up 24% for the year to date. So it's looking really good. I mean, for 1/3 of the year to have that kind of performance under the belt is excellent.
Yeah.
We've just got to hope that we can keep that up and not count our chickens before they hatch.
No. Good, sensible advice there.
Yeah.
Of course, if it were me, I'd be cashing in and going on holiday. But Garth, let's look at some of the trades that you had open, because it has been quite busy and you have been fairly active in the markets. The first one being Anglo American Platinum. What's going on there?
Yes, all right. So we did this trade a couple of weeks back, and we've still got it running at the moment. Just quickly to have a look at it, what I'd identified here was that, well, the stock is in a rising trend, first of all. But then what I'd identified was that we had this triangle pattern, and these are typically continuation patterns within a trend, and usually they will break out in the direction of the prevailing trend once that pattern breaks. And we saw that certainly happening. And what you typically do is you take the height of those triangle patterns at their broadest point, and then you take that distance and you project that up from where the breakout occurs. And that gives you a target. In this case, the target is 515 Rand. Now, the shares traded up to about 510 Rand in the last 2 weeks, but I'm still happy to hold. It hasn't quite reached our target yet. If we look at it, there's a nice steady rising trend that goes all the way back through to January 2014. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move our stop loss up on this trade just to the below that uptrend. So at the moment our stop loss is sitting at 435 Rand. You can see we were in there from 450 Rand.
So it's quite far away.
We're doing well, yeah. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that stop loss up to 475 Rand. And if we start seeing the share trade convincingly below 475 Rand, then I'll get out of this trade and bank the profit. But otherwise, I'm quite happy to keep the position on, and certainly whilst that trend is up, that dotted line trend that I've indicated there, I'm quite happy to stay long of this stock, certainly until our target price, and maybe even beyond that. Let's see. But for now, there's no reason for me to look to cut this trade at this stage.
So basically, the action of moving the stop loss up is to protect your profit.
Yeah.
The 510 Rand, were you tempted at all to cash in at that point? Because it has traded back subsequent to that.
Yeah. I traded there for a very short period of time, and I actually was away on holiday, so there was no temptation at that stage to bank the profit at 510. So now, look, to me that chart still looks very constructive, and what it looks to me right now like it's doing is actually almost mapping out like a little bit of another smaller triangle type of pattern over here, which is probably also likely to break to the upside. So whilst that is the case, I think we just stay long here. This is a good looking setup.
Okay. What about Kumba? That has been fairly volatile of late. Have you closed your position there? I
have, yes. So if we have a look at this trade, what I'd actually done, first of all, I identified this very large volume that had been trading during March. And I know I've explained this many times, but just once again, when you see a big volume spike like that, it implies a massive transition in the ownership of shares. You have a lot of selling pressure on the one hand, but then you also have a lot of aggressive buying pressure on the other hand. And typically when those sellers step off the gas, then what is left is a vacuum of selling pressure. And that seems to then result in the share price moving back up. And that's what I really identified here and what I looked at as a reason for initiating this trade. I then looked at the overhead resistance, which is at 385 Rand there, which is indicated by that dotted line. And I felt that there was a likelihood that we would go back up and test the underside of that resistance, and that's where I would look to bank my profit. So I've actually done that. We were in from 360 Rand with a stop loss at 348 Rand. Now I decided to sell out at 385 Rand and bank the profit, sticking to our strategy here. And with that, we banked 4,860 Rand in profits.
So not bad at all, but you could have had more. So
exactly.
Do you feel any way regretful that you banked the trade, or banked the profit rather, at 385 Rand?
Not really. I think my initial intention was to look for a rally to 385 and then bank the profit. I knew that there was a possibility that it might go up a little bit beyond that towards 400 Rand, but I just felt that I had a strategy in place initially to probably to exit at 385 Rand, and I thought, let me stick with that strategy. Also, given that we had other positions on. We were long of Amplats, this Kumba trade we had on, and then we also had a Pinnacle trade, which we'll talk about now. So we were fairly exposed. So I thought, you know what, all I was really looking for here in this Kumba was an oversold bounce. I mean, by and large, that's not a great looking technical chart otherwise, but I was looking for the oversold bounce. But to me, you know, if we think back to that Anglo Platinum chart, now that is a constructive chart. There's good steady pattern of rising highs and rising highs and rising
higher lows.
Higher highs and higher lows. That's what I'm looking for. And whereas this Kumba chart certainly doesn't look nearly as healthy as that. So I didn't feel the urge to stick around here for a long period of time. I really wanted the oversold bounce. We got that, and I'm taking my money and moving on.
Okay, and what about Pinnacle then on that note?
So Pinnacle was a similar sort of story, but different but similar. So again, we had this tremendous volume spike here, and you can see the share price dropped very, very, very dramatically in late March. And what that was caused by, I mean, that by the way, was a 45% drop in the share price in 2 days. And what that was caused by was a SENS announcement which the company put out to say that one of their directors had been arrested for alleged attempted bribery charges on a job, and it was an amount of 5 million Rand was involved. And the share price took a hell of a knock on the back of that. But this is a share that was very heavily owned in the derivative space, meaning single stock futures and CFDs. And what happened when you saw that aggressive selling pressure, it would have sparked a whole bunch of margin calls and forced selling in the derivative space. And I think that served to exacerbate the selling pressure. And I spoke on the show 2 weeks ago about the 3-day rule, how we look for whenever you get shock news in the market, like what we saw here, you typically wait 3 days for that news to be fully digested. And usually by the 3rd day, you've had an overreaction in the share price, and there tends to be a bit of a snapback in the other direction. And that's what we were looking for here. So I went in on the 3rd day after that news broke, and I went in at 12 Rand 15 with a very wide stop loss at 10 Rand 80. And I said at the time that I was really just looking for an oversold bounce to 15 Rand. I didn't want to stick around here for a long time, but I really just wanted to try and capitalize on that oversold bounce back towards 15 Rand. We got that. It traded up to a bit higher than 15 Rand, and then it subsequently has been drifting lower again. So I sold out at 15 Rand, and with that we banked a profit of 8,928 Rand. So a good trade all round. So effectively we're out of this trade now. We're out of the Kumba trade. We just long of that Anglo Platinum position still, and then I've also got my option structure in the background, which is trading out to to June rather.
I mean, and these were both opportunistic trades, but nicely executed, I suppose.
Yeah, that's it. And both playing the volume spike situation and that dynamic where you've got very aggressive selling on the one hand, but once the sellers have been exhausted, then you get that snapback rally in the other direction. And this is a setup that I like. These volume spike situations don't come around every day, but when they do come around, I find that they are very high probability setups. And provided you wait the 3 days and all that sort of stuff, wait for the selling pressure to start to abate, and then you've got an indication that the sellers have been exhausted, and then very often after that, you then see the price moving back up.
Yeah. Okay, Garth, then that leads us to this week's consideration. And I know that you want to talk once again about our slides of last week, which is seasonality and patterns that you and Andrew Todd had some research that you'd done there, and you want to look at the Rand-dollar exchange rate.
Yes, that's right. I want to look at the Rand-dollar exchange rate, and here we go. This was a chart that I put up in the seasonality show that we pre-recorded for last week. This is now data going back to 1998 on the Rand-dollar exchange rate, and what it does is it looks at the average movement in the Rand over each month of the year to try and get some sort of a seasonal play. And what's very interesting, you can see anything above the line here, in other words, these green bars indicate Rand weakness, and the ones below the line here, the red bars indicate Rand strength. And what's very, very evident is that January is typically a very weak month for the Rand. April is quite a strong month for the Rand, and we are seeing Rand strength this month. So this year we seem to be playing towards that seasonality. And then what often happens is you get weakness in May thereafter. And if you take this historical seasonal pattern between April and May, and you look at the weakness where in April you typically see the Rand up to 2% stronger during the month on average, but then by the end of May, you've suddenly found that it's now 3% weaker for the month of May. That whole swing around factor is 5%.
Yeah.
So based on this seasonality chart, I'm looking at the rand now and thinking, well, is there now an opportunity to possibly put a short rand position in place in anticipation of this seasonal aspect playing out once again? So that's the seasonal chart. Now let's have a look at the chart of the rand dollar exchange rate itself and see how this ties up together. Now there's the chart of the rand dollar. It goes back to 2011. And you can see that we've got a very steady trend of rand weakness over there. It's indicated quite clearly by that white trend line that I've put on there. You can see how that very well and very neatly joins up all the low points on that chart. Also, what we've got most recently, certainly since January and through February, March, and now into April, is we've seen the rand consolidating that weakness that we saw early this year. And that is now starting to take the form of what looks to me like a bull flag pattern. And those type of patterns usually break in the direction of the prevailing trend, which in this case would mean the likelihood is that we're going to see a break weaker in the rand. Also, we've got this lateral area which was previously resistance, and we highlighted that at the end of last year, and we actually entered a trade on this. Was our first trade of the year in 2014. And all of this basically comes together at about 10 Rand 40. You can see that uptrend comes in at 10 Rand 40, that lateral level comes in at 10 Rand 40, the bottom of our bull flag structure comes in at 10 Rand 40. So there and thereabouts is where I will now start to keep an eye out to potentially start building a short position in the rand. I'm not going to do it right now, I'm not doing it this week just yet, but this is something that I might look to phase in over the coming weeks to gradually put a short rand position in place. And again, tying it back to that seasonality factor that I spoke about, where the rand typically weakens during May.
And I mean, you alluded to the rand trade that you put on for the portfolio in January. That was a very, very strong trade, and it panned out exactly as I suppose you would have hoped. The rand was particularly weak then. When you talk about building a short position, Garth, maybe you could just flesh that out. I mean, how would you? Is it something that you would go in incrementally? Because you have, in the last couple of trades, well, certainly this year, you have phased in some of your trades. Is that something that you would do with a currency trade?
Yes, I would do the same sort of thing here. So what I would possibly do is look and say to myself, right, what size position do I want? I want X position size. And maybe I would go in, for example, 4 different legs to enter that trade. And I would maybe put someone around about these levels where we are now, 1050, 1045, somewhere there. If it goes a bit stronger, maybe I'd put a bit more on, and so on. And gradually build a position to try and get an average entry that is decent. Now, some people might say, but hang on a second, you say you should never average down. And I'm going to counter that and say, well, in this example, in talking the way I am now, it's not really averaging down, because what I'm doing is I'm saying, I know the position size that I want initially, but I've decided to break my entry up into 4 different parts. So I'm not really averaging down. Averaging down is when you go into a trade and then it starts to move against you and you say, you know what, I'll buy a bit more to make my average price lower. And then you end up with a bigger position than what you initially wanted, but with a lower price. But you actually take on a lot more risk doing that. Averaging down is an incredibly bad habit. But what I'm talking about here, about staggering an entry and going in gradually, is not really averaging down. It's more just trying to finesse an entry over a period of time.
Yeah, and I suppose you can do that with the rand. So volatile, it's probably the better approach than just going in at one point. Garth, so you did tell us that the portfolio is up 24% year to date, so a fantastic performance. And then just in graphic form there, where have we made the profits? Yeah,
well, these are all our open trades currently, or the recent trades. There's our top 40 put option structure, and I will come back and talk about this again soon, because I think we need to revisit this.
It's been lurking in the background.
It's been lurking in the background, but I think there's a reasonable chance that this could still work for us now in the second quarter. Our Anglo Platinum trade, we banked a nice, we haven't banked a profit, sorry, but we've got a mark-to-market profit of over 15,000 Rand sitting there, so that's a great trade. Kumba Iron Ore, we did bank that profit, and we banked 4,800 Rand there. And then Pinnacle, we also banked a nice profit, just shy of 9,000 Rand profit on that trade. So all in all, it puts us at over 310,000 Rand for the portfolio. Remember that we start the year with 250,000, so that means we're up 24% for the year to date, with 3.5 months down. So good going. Good
going, yeah. It gives you a lot of confidence, and I'm sure you can kind of breathe easy and take decisions quite in a fairly relaxed fashion when you're not chasing anything. Garth, we have to leave it there. No courses to talk about this week, but we'll pick up again next week. And thanks very much.
Thank you.
That's Garth McKenzie, founder and editor of Traders Corner.
Traders Corner is proudly brought to you by IG, the specialists in CFD trading.